members of the committee. My name is Affie Ellis, and I'm a state senator from Wyoming. It is an honor to appear before you today. Wyoming is one of the largest land-based states, though we are the least populated state in the country with fewer than 600,000 people. Though we are small, we are mighty in the sense that we power America. Wyoming produces 14 times more energy than it consumes, and it is the biggest net energy supplier among the states. Wyoming has ranked first in the nation for natural gas production and second in oil production on federal lands. In 2019, the oil and gas industry delivered $1.67 billion to state and local governments in Wyoming, and it employed nearly 20,000 people. I grew up in Wyoming, and I'm thankful for all the opportunities it provided me. My parents are both Navajo, and they grew up on the Navajo reservation. They attended boarding schools where my dad was taught to weld. When they graduated in the mid-1950s, my dad found a job working as a welder in Jackson Hole, and they started our family there. As the youngest of 4 kids, I was the first in my family to attend college and eventually earn my law degree. I decided to run for the Wyoming Senate in 2016 to give back to this state, which has given me so much. At the time, we could see on our horizon a downturn in energy production, which would impact almost all the services Wyoming provides to its citizenry. Wyoming has among the most volatile year-over-year revenue collections in the nation, which has forced us to recognize boom years for what they are and plan accordingly. As a result, we have saved, and we continue to save, a significant portion of the revenue derived from mineral production to offset years when development isn't as robust. We've worked to support our other top industries, which are tourism and agriculture, and to develop new industries, particularly in the field of technology. Despite these efforts, there is no other sector that produces the kind of revenue for Wyoming that energy provides. With declines in energy production, Wyoming has cut its budget significantly in the last several years, which impacts things like healthcare services, support for our seniors, and the developmentally disabled. With continued assaults on domestic energy production, we are now working to resolve a $300 million per year projected structural deficit in K-12 education. Wyoming leaders recognize the precariousness of revenues derived from energy production. We know we can't control global markets, and we know we can't predict the price of oil. However, we have significant concerns when leaders within our own country attack and undermine our energy economy. Nearly half of the surface lands in Wyoming are managed by the federal government. The Bureau of Land Management, for example, has lands that significantly support oil and gas leasing, including BLM lands that are intermixed with private lands and state lands in what we refer to as the checkerboard. Because federal land management decisions impact the livelihood of our citizens and the strength of our state so heavily, we commissioned a study to understand the potential impacts of an oil and gas lease moratorium and drilling ban on federal lands. A link to that study is included in my written testimony. For Wyoming, the study found that either a moratorium or an outright drilling ban would constitute a significant shock to the Wyoming economy, reducing tax revenues, income, and employment. By the end of President Biden's first term, a moratorium would cause Wyoming to lose an average of 15,269 jobs annually, lose cumulatively $8.3 billion in gross domestic product, $3.8 billion in personal income, and $1.8 billion in state tax revenues. An outright ban would be even more devastating. You can imagine how we felt on January 20th, 2021, when the U.S. Department of the Interior called for an immediate 60-day suspension of new oil and gas leases and drilling permits on federal lands. I want you to think of your state's #1 priority. This order is akin to banning rubber and plastic manufacturing in Ohio or banning gaming in Nevada. The moratorium has been extended, and our state is gravely concerned it will be extended indefinitely or that an outright ban is soon to follow. Accordingly, our governor has filed a lawsuit which explains how this halt on new oil and gas leases violates several existing federal laws, and it asks the court to require the Bureau of Land Management to resume quarterly oil and gas lease sales. Additionally, one of Wyoming's 2 tribes expressed its opposition to the leasing moratorium because although Indian tribes themselves are exempt from the moratorium, the adverse impact on Wyoming also adversely impacts tribal members who are also citizens of our state. I hope we can reverse course. As Wyoming continues to navigate its way out of these incredibly challenging economic times, we appreciate your willingness to support policies that support economic recovery in rural places like Wyoming. But as the U.S. Senate considers not only what the federal government should do, it should also discuss what the federal government should not do. Wyoming needs you to understand how executive orders signed with the stroke of a pen without congressional approval can literally devastate our state's economy. We want the freedom, stability, and support from our federal leaders to be able to invest in ourselves. Thank you for this opportunity to provide written testimony. I'm happy to answer any questions.
One of the things I was wondering if you could share with us is what will the impact be on Wyoming schools and including rural schools? That's most of Wyoming, as you point out, is rural. Um, these schools, my understanding is they depend significantly on royalties from oil and gas. And if this administration's ban on new leases remains in effect, is that going to have a significant adverse impact on the rural schools of Wyoming?
Thank you, Senator Toomey. The answer is yes. Um, Wyoming is very blessed in that we have abundance of natural resources, including robust minerals, and we've relied on that mineral industry to provide for significant revenues in our state's budget. And so it isn't just about severance taxes and ad valorem. It really is a trickle down of other industries, that supports local welders and other related businesses. So when we see attacks on our energy economy, it really does hurt rural America because as we see students move out, then declining enrollment. But as we look at declines in the production and the cost of things like the price of oil, we are looking at a $300 million annual structural deficit out of a $1.5 billion statewide K through 12 education budget. We are working through those issues, and we're happy to do that, knowing that our economy is very reliant on a volatile industry that depends on commodity prices. However, when our government leaders start attacking our economy directly, that's where we have significant concerns. And I would echo Ms. Skama's sentiment that, I'm happy to talk about some effects that we have in our agricultural industry in Wyoming. It is important for us to support our ag producers. We have large cattle ranching opportunities. Our state legislature often has tried to take aggressive stance to provide more opportunities for our ag producers in kind of breaking up some of that consolidation that was mentioned. However, when we look at our forecast for the future, it really depends on our energy economy for how we're going to fund all of our essential services.
So, Senator Ellis, I was kind of curious if you could speak to the challenges Wyoming has faced with these policies that seem to be incongruent. On the one hand, diversify. On the other hand, take out all the opportunities that you may have to do just that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Tillis. In my testimony, I go into some great lengths to talk a little bit about how Wyoming in recent years has worked to diversify its tech economy. Certainly living in a rural area, we've had to think outside the box in how we deliver some of our services. And I think COVID-19 has really kind of amplified our ability to look at how we deliver education remotely, utilizing telehealth better, and just kind of digging deeper in some of those areas. Over the last several years, we have invested significantly in trying to expand the number of data centers that we have in our state, making sure our kids are being exposed to computer science in all grade levels. And so some of this does take time. But at the end of the day, no matter what we do, I think we do need to realize that we play to our strengths, and our greatest strength when it comes to revenue production and job production is through energy. In addition to the traditional forms of revenue generation of severance tax, ad valorem tax, whenever we look at sales tax, for example, the cost of energy companies when they buy that kind of equipment in our state, certainly is a contributor to things like sales tax. So when we see assaults on our domestic energy production in Wyoming, it hits us on a lot of different levels. And so, we're happy to continue to diversify our economy. Tourism is our second largest industry, and we welcome people to come to Wyoming. But at the end of the day, energy is our strongest strength, and we're proud to power America. And, just in how these things weave together, I think it's also important to recognize that as our technology needs grow, every picture you take, every video you record that's sent up to a cloud requires that information and data to be housed in a data center. And so we do need to kind of have a better understanding of just our carbon footprint and our energy demands as technology becomes more prevalent in our society.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Toomey. Can you hear me? We're having some difficulties here.
We can see and hear you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate this opportunity. And I particularly want to thank State Senator Affie Ellis for joining us today from Wyoming. She is deeply involved in these issues, and the fact that she's willing to provide testimony today is deeply appreciated, as are our other Western witnesses, because the West experiences so many of the issues that are the subject of this hearing today. So my first question is for Senator Ellis. What percentage of natural gas and oil development comes from federal lands in Wyoming?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Senator Lummis, I believe that about 90+% from federal land, natural gas is, that's the origin, and then more than half, 50% of oil.
And I'm so glad that you had those numbers at the ready, because I don't think people understand how significant mineral production is on federal lands in Wyoming. So when there's a moratorium or a prohibition on producing minerals on federal land in Wyoming, that essentially removes 90% of our production. And since we are the largest net exporter of energy in the nation, it puts a tremendous burden on our education system, because such an important component of education funding in Wyoming comes from oil, gas, and coal development on federal land. So again, Senator Ellis, according to the Wyoming Department of Education, how much did the oil and gas industry contribute to Wyoming K through 12 education in 2019?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, and Senator Lummis, thank you. In 2019, the oil and gas industry delivered $1.67 billion to state and local governments. Of that, approximately $740 million went to our K through 12 budget. As I mentioned in my written testimony, that's about half of our entire expenditure for K through 12 education alone. We have about 90,000 students in Wyoming, and we finance our education system well. But it is more expensive to educate kids in rural areas. If you look at our larger cities, places like Cheyenne, we do see some efficiencies of economy, but when it comes to rural areas, there's no other substitute. So those dollars are critical for supporting rural America through our rural schools.
Well, thank you. And as you know, oil and gas industries can move. They can go to the Permian Basin where it's private land. And the only one that gets hurt is the state of Wyoming and our school kids. It doesn't hurt the oil and gas companies. It doesn't stop them from producing oil and gas. It only hurts Wyoming and the people who live there. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that a letter to President Biden from Wyoming Superintendent of Public Instruction, Jillian Balow, regarding the fiscal impact on Wyoming students and schools be entered into the hearing record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Ellis, how difficult has it been for the Wyoming legislature to adequately fund education over the last decade?
Funding education remains probably the biggest challenge that I'm working on in our horizon. As I mentioned, we have a $1.5 billion annual budget for K through 12 operations, and right now we're looking at a $300 million structural deficit. Certainly the federal government has passed things like the American Recovery Plan Act. We've received that funding, but a lot of that comes with some strings. And so unfortunately, as we've been studying that issue and how to allocate that to our school districts to maintain equity and maintain our effort, I think at the end of the day, my biggest concern is that we're going to see our cliff actually grow, because we are really limited in our ability to rein in some of the spending on K through 12 education. So we're looking at that act and trying to understand some of those challenges better, but that is the #1 issue that I've been working on and that many of my colleagues are focused on going forward.
And how much of the state's tax revenue, including education funding, is projected to be lost from President Biden's moratorium?
So the Wyoming legislature is very concerned about any, moratoriums or drilling bans that affect our federal lands. Several years ago, we appropriated some dollars to commission a study. The University of Wyoming was selected, and a UW economist produced a report in December of 2020. The report statistics were sobering. Over the next 4 years, Wyoming looks like it would lose about $1 billion with the moratorium on new drilling lease activity. A full ban would be even more devastating. And to put that again in perspective, our annual operations for just the general fund of our government is $1.3 billion. This removal would really take out an entire year of us being able to fund our state government operations and more, if the moratorium were to continue indefinitely, or if more dramatic steps occur in the future, which would ban drilling on federal lands outright.
I have so many more questions, Senator Ellis, but unfortunately my time is up. Thank you so much for your testimony, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Lummis. Senator Ossoff from Georgia.
Senator Ellis, you know firsthand how important energy and pipeline revenues are for local communities. Can you speak about how we can support our rural communities by investing in our energy economy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator. First and foremost for Wyoming, the purpose for me to be here today is to urge members of Congress and the presidential administration to remove this halt and moratorium on oil and gas leasing on federal lands. Certainly over the years, we have invested a lot in developing not only our energy resources, but other natural resources as well. And the Wyoming and our country has a lot to be proud of. We do regulate these activities very fairly and do our best to make sure that we're conserving our natural resources. And so I think, any effort and movement that we can to recognize that we are protecting our natural resources and conserving them while having robust domestic energy production, that those two activities coexist, certainly are appreciated in my neck of the woods.
Thank you. We talked about the natural gas and oil and so forth. I want to talk a little bit about forestry. The timber sector in Montana was once a major economic driver for our rural communities across our state. In fact, when I was growing up, we had over 30 sawmills in Montana. Now that number's dwindled to 7. It's been devastating to our rural economies, not only through job loss, but through the financial hardships that accompany an increase in catastrophic wildfires. And remember, when timber harvest was higher, Montana forest functions as a carbon sink. Forests absorb carbon. Wildfires emit carbon. Montana forests now yield net positive carbon emissions, and this will only increase unless we dramatically improve forest management. Senator Ellis, I understand over time Wyoming has lost all timber processing capacity, and now your forests are in the same boat as Montana, operating as a carbon source rather than a carbon sink. Could you speak to the job opportunities and environmental benefits of forest management and what needs to happen in order to restore a healthy wood product sector in our communities?
Yeah, over the last 100 years, I think we've seen a dramatic shift in how we manage our forests in this country. Usually occasional fires that would go through the area were healthy and natural events that help sustain forests. But obviously we started using our forest, they're housed in the Department of Agriculture at the federal level. So I think they were always viewed as a product or a crop or a product that we would utilize in providing timber sources for our country. Over the years though, we've started limiting and putting out wildfires when we see them. And now we're starting to see forests that are more and more dense and clogged and creating really unhealthy conditions. So certainly in Wyoming, you would think that that would be a great opportunity for private sector activity to go in and clear out some of those dead trees and harvest trees. But we've seen declines in that because of how we manage our forest. And it really is this kind of assault on overall health forest management. It's created a situation where I'm greatly concerned about the number of dead trees as I drive through the national forests in Wyoming. The rust rot, I think, is just it's a tinderbox. And, one unfortunate thunderstorm or campfire that gets out of hand will not only devastate the environment, but just the activity overall really hinders our ability to utilize that resource for good jobs in the West.
Thanks, Senator Ellis. I'm out of time. It's remarkable that we can't even get in and cut down dead trees because of radical environmentalists that litigate a lot of these timber projects. Thanks, Senator Ellis. Appreciate your comments.